The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in July 1877, delivered by the worn hands of a postal rider who looked like he had ridden through hell itself to reach the dusty ranch outside San Diego, California. William Warren stood on the porch of the modest wooden house he shared with his older brother, watching the rider approach with curiosity that quickly turned to dread when he saw the carefully folded paper sealed with blue wax. His brother Thomas had died 3 months prior, thrown from a spooked horse during a lightning storm, but William had not yet found the courage to inform anyone beyond their immediate neighbors. William accepted the letter with trembling fingers, already knowing this would complicate everything. The postal rider tipped his hat and rode off without waiting for a response, leaving William alone with the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against his palm. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the cream-colored paper, revealing elegant handwriting that spoke of education and refinement. "My dearest Thomas," it began, and William felt his heart sink further. "I write to you with joy and anticipation as the day of our meeting draws near. It has been 2 years since we began our correspondence, and I feel I know your soul as intimately as my own. My father has finally given his blessing for me to travel west to become your bride. I will arrive in San Diego on the 20th of July. I have enclosed my photograph so you might recognize me at the station. Yours with deepest affection, Catherine Zimmerman." William stood frozen on the porch, reading the letter 3 more times as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less complicated. A photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the wooden planks at his feet. He bent to retrieve it, and his breath caught when he saw her face. She was beautiful in a quiet, thoughtful way, with dark hair pinned back from a face that held both intelligence and kindness. Her eyes seemed to look directly at him through the sepia tones, and he felt something shift in his chest. The 20th of July was 3 days away. William calculated quickly, his mind racing through possibilities and complications. San Diego was a 3-day ride north from the ranch if he pushed hard, and the weather held. This woman, this Catherine Zimmerman, was traveling across the country to marry a man who no longer existed, and she had no idea she was heading toward heartbreak. The decent thing would be to send a telegram explaining the situation, advising her to return home before she wasted her time and money on a failed journey. William walked back into the house and sat at the rough wooden table where he and Thomas had shared countless meals. He pulled out a piece of paper and his writing implements, fully intending to draft a message that would spare them both the awkwardness of a face-to-face meeting. But as he sat there with the pen poised above the paper, he found he could not form the words. The photograph lay beside him, and he kept glancing at it, drawn by something he could not name. He imagined her on a train at this very moment, traveling through landscapes she had likely never seen before, her heart full of hope and dreams about the future she was riding toward. To receive a telegram announcing that the man she had been writing to for 2 years was dead would devastate her, possibly strand her in a strange city with no resources and no plan. William made a decision that would alter the course of his entire life. He would ride to San Diego himself, meet Catherine Zimmerman in person, and explain the situation face to face. It was the honorable thing to do, he told himself. He would ensure she had safe lodging and help her arrange passage back east if that was what she wished. It was what Thomas would have wanted him to do. He spent the rest of that day preparing for the journey, gathering supplies and informing his neighbor, a grizzled former cavalry scout named Henderson, that he would be gone for at least a week. Henderson raised an eyebrow when William explained the situation, but offered no judgment, merely promised to keep an eye on the property, and the small herd of cattle that represented William's modest livelihood. William set out before dawn the next morning, riding his best horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, who had never let him down. The July heat was already building as the sun rose over the chaparral-covered hills, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. William kept a steady pace, not wanting to exhaust his horse but keenly aware that he could not afford delays. As he rode, his mind kept returning to the letter and the photograph tucked safely in his saddlebag. He tried to imagine what kind of woman would agree to marry a man she had never met, to travel thousands of miles on nothing more than written words and promises. It spoke of either tremendous courage or desperate circumstances, and William found himself hoping it was the former. The idea that Catherine Zimmerman might be fleeing some terrible situation back east made his chest tighten with concern. He also found himself wondering about his brother's secret correspondence. Thomas had never mentioned writing to a woman back east, had never spoken of marriage or future plans that included a wife. They had been close, or so William had always believed, yet Thomas had kept this enormous part of his life completely hidden. William felt a surge of complicated emotions, grief and betrayal and sadness all tangled together. Had Thomas not trusted him? Had he planned to announce his engagement only when Catherine arrived? The first day of riding passed in a blur of heat and dust, and the rhythmic sound of Copper's hooves against the hard, packed earth. William stopped twice to water his horse and eat some of the dried meat and hard biscuits he had packed. He camped that night beside a creek, building a small fire and lying on his bedroll beneath a sky so full of stars, it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Sleep came slowly, his mind too full of questions and uncertainties. What would he say when he saw Catherine Zimmerman? How did one break such news gently? He rehearsed various approaches, but none of them felt adequate. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he drifted into restless dreams where he was reading letters written in a language he could not understand. The second day was harder than the first, the accumulated fatigue settling into his muscles and bones. The landscape changed gradually as he rode north, the dry hills giving way to areas with more vegetation and occasional farms. He passed through a small settlement around midday, stopping just long enough to refill his canteen and buy some fresh bread from a woman who eyed him with the suspicious curiosity common to people who lived in isolated places. That evening, as he made camp beside a stand of oak trees, William allowed himself to take out the photograph again. In the fading light, Catherine Zimmerman's face seemed to hold secrets he wanted to understand. What had she written to Thomas about during their 2 years of correspondence? What had Thomas written to her? William felt a pang of envy for the connection his brother had formed with this woman, a connection that had been deep enough to bring her across the country. The third day dawned clear and hot, and William knew he had to make good time to reach San Diego before the afternoon train arrived. His back ached from sleeping on the ground, and his clothes were stiff with dust and sweat, but he pushed on with grim determination. Copper sensed his urgency and responded with steady effort, the faithful horse carrying him mile after mile toward a meeting William both dreaded and, strangely, anticipated. He reached the outskirts of San Diego just after noon, the city sprawling before him in a way that made his ranch seem like a child's plaything. Buildings of wood and adobe clustered along streets that teemed with activity. Wagons creaked past loaded with goods. Women in proper dresses walked with parasols to shade them from the sun, and men in suits conducted business on street corners. William suddenly felt very conscious of his trail-worn appearance, the dust that covered him from hat to boots. He found a public stable and left Copper in capable hands with instructions for a rub-down and extra grain. Then he located a bathhouse and paid for the luxury of hot water and soap, scrubbing away 3 days of travel until he felt almost human again. His spare shirt was not much cleaner than the one he had removed, but he did his best to make himself presentable. He had no illusions that he could pass for the kind of refined gentleman Catherine Zimmerman was probably expecting, but at least he would not smell like a range rider. The train station was easy to find, a substantial building with a platform where a handful of people already waited. William checked his pocket watch, a silver piece that had belonged to his father, and saw that he had nearly an hour before the scheduled arrival. He positioned himself where he would have a clear view of passengers disembarking and settled in to wait, his heart beating faster with each passing minute. The train arrived in a cloud of steam and the screech of brakes, right on schedule. William stood straighter, his hand unconsciously moving to his saddlebag where he had tucked the letter and photograph. Passengers began to descend, a motley collection of travelers that included businessmen, families, and rough-looking individuals who might have been miners or railroad workers. Then he saw her, and the photograph had not done her justice. Catherine Zimmerman stepped down from the train car with careful grace, one gloved hand holding her skirt clear of the steps, while the other gripped a small traveling case. She wore a dress of deep green that somehow had managed to survive the journey looking relatively fresh, and her dark hair was pinned up beneath a modest hat. But it was her face that held William's attention, those intelligent eyes scanning the crowd with an expression that mixed hope and nervousness in equal measure. She was looking for Thomas, William realized with a jolt, looking for the man she had traveled so far to marry. He watched as her gaze passed over him without recognition, continuing to search the platform. Her expression began to shift, hope giving way to concern as she failed to find the face she expected. William knew he had to act before she became truly frightened. He approached slowly, removing his hat as he drew near. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice rough from disuse and nerves. She turned to him, her eyes widening slightly. Up close, he could see that they were a warm brown flecked with gold. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying a trace of some Eastern accent he could not quite place. "I am Catherine Zimmerman. Are you Thomas Warren?" This was the moment he had been dreading for 3 days, and yet now that it was here, William found himself wishing he could lie, could pretend to be his brother just to keep that hopeful expression on her face a little longer. But he had never been a liar, and he would not start now, no matter how tempting. "No, madam," he said quietly, acutely aware of the people moving around them on the busy platform. "My name is William Warren. Thomas was my brother. Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" He watched the color drain from her face as she processed his words, the emphasis he had placed on the past tense. "Was," she whispered, and he saw her hand tighten on the handle of her traveling case until her knuckles went white. "What do you mean, was?" "Please," William said, gesturing toward the station building. "Let me buy you a cup of coffee and I will explain everything. I know this is not what you were expecting, and I am truly sorry." Catherine stood frozen for a long moment, and William could see her fighting to maintain her composure. Then she lifted her chin in a gesture that spoke of considerable inner strength and nodded once, sharply. "Very well, Mr. Warren. I believe I deserve an explanation." They found a small restaurant near the station, a humble establishment that served simple food to travelers and locals alike. William secured a corner table that offered some privacy and ordered coffee for both of them, though he doubted either would drink much. When they were settled, he forced himself to meet her eyes directly. "Thomas died 3 months ago," he said, deciding that direct honesty was the only acceptable approach. There was a storm, his horse spooked, and he was thrown. He died instantly. I am sorry that no one informed you, but I did not know you existed until your letter arrived yesterday morning. Catherine sat perfectly still, her face a mask that revealed nothing of the turmoil that must be raging inside her. "I see," she said after a long pause, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "And you rode here to tell me this in person rather than sending a telegram." "A telegram seemed too cold," William said. "You had traveled so far with such expectations. I thought the least I could do was meet you, explain in person, and help you arrange passage back east if that is what you wish." Something flickered across her face, an emotion too quick for William to identify. "That is very considerate of you, Mr. Warren. You have gone to considerable trouble on my behalf." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the restaurant filling the space between them. William noticed that Catherine had not cried, had not collapsed into the dramatic grief he might have expected. Instead, she seemed to be thinking, processing, calculating in a way that intrigued him. "May I ask you something?" she said finally, looking at him with those perceptive eyes. "Did Thomas mention me to you before he died? Did he speak of our plans?" William shook his head, feeling guilty for reasons he could not fully explain. "He did not. I had no idea he was corresponding with anyone. We were close, or I thought we were, but he kept your existence entirely to himself." "How curious," Catherine murmured, and William caught a hint of something bitter in her tone. 2 years of letters, and he never mentioned me to his own brother." "Did he mention me to you?" William asked, genuinely curious. Catherine tilted her head slightly, considering. "He spoke of having a brother, but only in passing. He wrote primarily about himself, about the ranch, about his plans for the future. He painted quite a picture of life in California, of opportunities and new beginnings." There was definitely something in her voice now, something that made William lean forward slightly. "And you needed a new beginning?" he asked gently. She met his gaze steadily, and he saw her making a decision about whether to trust him. "My father died 6 months ago," she said finally. "He was a school teacher in Philadelphia, and we lived modestly but comfortably. When he passed, I discovered that he had debts I knew nothing about. The house was sold to settle them, and I found myself with very few options. An unmarried woman of 23 with no family and limited resources faces a difficult world, Mr. Warren." William felt a surge of sympathy and anger on her behalf. "So you agreed to marry a man you had never met?" "I agreed to marry a man whose letters suggested intelligence and kindness," Catherine corrected. "A man who offered me not just security but partnership, or so I believed." She paused, looking down at her untouched coffee. "It seems I may have been mistaken about the kindness, at least." What kind of man proposes marriage and then never bothers to mention his intended bride to his own brother? William had no answer to that, because the same question had been troubling him. "Thomas was a good man in many ways," he said slowly. "But I am beginning to realize I did not know him as well as I thought." They sat together in that corner of the restaurant, two strangers bound together by a dead man's secrets and a letter that had arrived too late. William studied Catherine's face, noting the intelligence there, the strength that kept her from falling apart despite having her entire future collapse in the space of a few minutes. He found himself wanting to know more about her, wanting to hear her story in her own words. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. Catherine was silent for a long time, her gaze distant as she considered her limited options. "I spent nearly all my remaining money on the train ticket," she admitted, her voice carefully neutral. "I have enough for perhaps a week in a boarding house if I am frugal. Beyond that—" She shrugged slightly. I suppose I will need to find employment of some kind. San Diego is growing from what I observed during my arrival. Perhaps there is a family that needs a governess or a teacher." "You are not going back east?" William asked, surprised. "To what?" Catherine asked, and for the first time he heard real emotion break through her controlled exterior. "I have no home there, Mr. Warren. No family, no prospects. At least here I am already in California, already where I intended to be. The only thing missing is the husband I thought was waiting for me." William made a decision that was probably foolish, that he would likely regret, but that felt absolutely right in that moment. "Come back to the ranch with me," he said. Catherine's eyes widened. "I beg your pardon." "The ranch that was Thomas's is now mine," William explained quickly, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to make her understand. "It is not large and it is not fancy, but the house has 2 bedrooms. You could stay there, at least temporarily, while you figure out what you want to do. I spend most of my time working the land anyway, and Henderson, my neighbor, stops by regularly. It would be entirely proper." "That is a very generous offer, Mr. Warren, but I could not possibly accept," Catherine said, though William could see the temptation in her eyes. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be a thief or worse. You rode across the entire country to marry a man you had never met based on nothing more than his letters," William said. "That tells me you are either remarkably brave or remarkably desperate, and I am inclined to believe it is the former. Besides, you could say the same about me. How do you know I am who I claim to be? You have your brother's eyes," Catherine said softly, and William felt something shift in his chest at her words. "I can see the resemblance, now that I am looking for it. Thomas sent me a photograph many months ago." They looked at each other across the table, and William felt the weight of this moment, the way their lives were balancing on the edge of a decision that could send them in entirely different directions. He knew he should not care so much about what this woman chose to do. He had fulfilled his obligation by coming to San Diego and explaining the situation in person. If she decided to try her luck in the city, that was her choice to make. But he found that he did care, more than was reasonable or sensible. Perhaps it was because she had loved his brother, or thought she had. Perhaps it was because he felt guilty that Thomas had brought her all this way with false promises. Or perhaps it was something simpler and more dangerous. He was drawn to her in a way he had never been drawn to anyone before. "I can promise you safety and respect," William said quietly. "Nothing more, but certainly nothing less. You would have time to decide what you want to do, to make plans that are not driven by desperation. And if you decided you wanted to stay permanently, well, the ranch could use a woman's touch. It has been just men for a long time, and we have let certain standards slip." Catherine smiled slightly at that, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing light to her eyes. "You are offering me charity, Mr. Warren." "I am offering you an option," William corrected. "What you do with it is entirely up to you." She was quiet for another long moment, and William could practically see her mind working through the possibilities and implications. Finally, she nodded once, decisively. "Very well, Mr. Warren. I accept your offer, at least temporarily, but I insist on earning my keep. I can cook, clean, tend a garden, keep accounts. I will not be a burden to you." "I never thought you would be," William said honestly. They worked out the practical details over the remainder of their coffee. Catherine had 2 more bags in the station's storage area, which William collected while she waited. He arranged for a room at a modest but respectable boarding house for the night, insisting that she get a good rest before they began the 3-day journey back to the ranch. Catherine accepted with grace, clearly exhausted from her own long journey. "I will collect you at first light," William told her as he left her at the boarding house door. The ride will be long, but I will keep the pace manageable. We should reach the ranch by late afternoon 3 days from now." "Thank you, Mr. Warren," Catherine said, and he could see genuine gratitude in her expression. "You have been remarkably kind in a situation that could have been much worse." "Call me William," he said impulsively. "If we are going to be living under the same roof, even temporarily, formality seems excessive." "Then you must call me Catherine," she replied, and there was that small smile again. William walked back through the darkening streets of San Diego, his mind whirling with the events of the day. He had come to this city expecting to deliver bad news and then return home alone. Instead, he was bringing back a woman who was supposed to have been his sister-in-law, a woman who stirred feelings in him that were both inappropriate and undeniable. He told himself that his interest in Catherine was purely protective, born of obligation to his dead brother and natural sympathy for a woman in difficult circumstances. But as he lay in his own rented room that night, he found himself thinking about the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her voice, the way she had refused to break down even when her entire world had been upended. Morning came too quickly and too slowly at once. William collected Catherine from the boarding house and was pleased to see that she had dressed practically for the journey ahead, wearing a simpler dress and sturdy boots rather than the traveling outfit of the previous day. Her bags were modest in size, containing only essentials, and William secured them to his saddle while Catherine looked on. "I should warn you that I am not an experienced rider," Catherine admitted as William led her to the stables where he had arranged to rent a gentle mare for the journey. "We did not keep horses in Philadelphia. Daisy here is as calm as they come," William assured her, stroking the brown mare's neck. "She will take care of you, just relax and let her do the work." He helped Catherine mount, acutely aware of the brief contact of his hands on her waist, the trust implicit in the way she allowed him to assist her. Once she was settled, he swung up onto Copper and led the way out of San Diego, heading south toward home. The first day of their return journey was slower than William's frantic ride north had been, limited by Catherine's inexperience and the need to keep both horses fresh. But the slower pace allowed for conversation, and as the miles passed, William found himself learning more about the woman riding beside him. Catherine told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, the daughter of a scholar who had taught her to read before she was 5 and who had treated her education as seriously as if she had been a son. She spoke of books and ideas, of dreams of seeing more of the world than the narrow streets of her neighborhood. Her father's death had been unexpected, a fever that came on suddenly and killed him within a week, leaving Catherine alone and adrift. In turn, William told her about growing up on the ranch, about parents who had died when he and Thomas were still young, forcing them to become men before their time. He spoke of the challenges of ranching in California, of droughts and cattle thieves and the constant struggle to make the land profitable. He found it surprisingly easy to talk to Catherine, her questions intelligent and her interest genuine. They camped that first night in the same spot William had used on his journey north, and he was careful to arrange their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining the propriety he had promised. Catherine surprised him by being surprisingly capable with camp tasks, helping to prepare their simple meal and clean up afterward without complaint. "You are not what I expected," William admitted as they sat by the fire, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. "What did you expect?" Catherine asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Someone more fragile, I suppose," William said honestly. "Someone who would need more taking care of. I learned early that the only person I could truly rely on was myself," Catherine said quietly. My father was wonderful, but he had his head in the clouds most of the time. I was managing our household by the time I was 15. One learns to be practical when one must be. Is that why you agreed to marry Thomas? William asked. Practicality. Catherine was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Partly, she admitted, but I also genuinely enjoyed his letters. He wrote beautifully about this place, about the freedom and possibilities of California. I thought we might build something good together, even if we were not starting from a position of romantic love. I thought perhaps that could grow over time. William understood that, understood the loneliness that would drive someone to take such a risk. He had felt that same loneliness on the ranch, the sense that life was passing him by while he worked day after day with only cattle and land for company. The second day of travel brought them through more varied terrain, and William found himself pointing out features of the landscape to Catherine, pleased by her attentive interest. She asked questions about the plants and animals they saw, about the ranches they passed, absorbing information like someone who was planning to stay rather than just passing through. That evening, as they made camp, a group of riders approached in the distance. William tensed instinctively, his hand moving toward the rifle he kept with his saddle, but as they drew closer, he relaxed. He recognized Henderson's distinctive gray horse and the man's weathered face beneath his battered hat. "Thought I might meet you on the road," Henderson called out as he reined in. Two younger men were with him, ranch hands from a neighboring property. "Wanted to make sure you made it back safe." William made introductions, and Henderson tipped his hat respectfully to Catherine, his sharp eyes taking in the situation with quick understanding. "Madam," he said simply, "welcome to California." "Thank you," Catherine replied with genuine warmth. "It is a beautiful country." Henderson and his companions shared their camp that night, and William was grateful for the additional propriety their presence provided. The conversation ranged over local news and ranch business, and William noticed that Catherine listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed she was genuinely trying to understand this new world she had entered. When Henderson pulled William aside on the pretense of checking on the horses, the older man got straight to the point. "She the one who was supposed to marry Thomas?" "She is," William confirmed. "And now she is coming to live at your ranch," Henderson said, his tone carefully neutral. "In Thomas's room," William said firmly. "As a guest, until she decides what she wants to do." Henderson studied him with eyes that had seen too much of life to be easily fooled. "You are playing with fire, boy. A woman like that under your roof, and you trying to pretend you are not interested. That is a recipe for trouble." "I am not pretending anything," William said, perhaps too sharply. "I am trying to do the right thing." "The right thing would have been to put her on a train back east," Henderson said bluntly. "You brought her to your ranch for a reason, even if you are not ready to admit what that reason is." William had no answer to that, because Henderson was probably right. He lay awake that night, listening to the quiet sounds of the camp, acutely aware of Catherine sleeping on the other side of the dying fire. What was he doing, bringing her to the ranch? Henderson's words echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront questions he had been avoiding. The truth was that he had been drawn to Catherine from the moment he saw her photograph, and meeting her in person had only intensified that attraction. She was intelligent, brave, and beautiful, everything he had ever imagined wanting in a partner. But she had come west to marry his brother, and it felt deeply wrong to have these feelings about her so soon after Thomas's death and the shattering of her expectations. The third day dawned clear and bright, and Henderson and his companions left after breakfast, heading back to their own ranches. William and Catherine continued south, and as the landscape became more familiar, William felt a complicated mix of emotions. He was bringing Catherine home, but it was not really her home and he was not really her family. What would happen once they arrived? How long would she stay? And what would he do when she inevitably decided to leave? They reached the ranch in late afternoon, and William tried to see it through Catherine's eyes. The house was small but solid, built of wood with a covered porch that faced west toward the sunset. The barn and outbuildings were in good repair, and the land stretched away in gentle rolls covered with grass that was brown from the summer heat. It was not grand, but it was honest and real, the product of years of hard work. "It is lovely," Catherine said softly, and William could hear that she meant it. He helped her down from Daisy and carried her bags into the house, showing her to what had been Thomas's room. It was sparse, containing only a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table, but the window looked out over the land and there was a sense of peace in the space. "I will leave you to settle in," William said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "The kitchen is through there, and please help yourself to anything you need. I should see to the horses and check on the cattle." "William," Catherine said, and he turned back to find her looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Thank you for everything. I know this is strange for both of us, but I am truly grateful." "You are welcome," William said, and then he fled before he could do something foolish like tell her how much her presence already meant to him. The next few days established a routine that was both comfortable and charged with unspoken tension. Catherine kept her word about earning her keep, taking over the cooking and bringing a level of organization to the house that it had not seen in years. She planted herbs near the kitchen door, mended clothing that William had been meaning to repair for months, and generally made the place feel like a home rather than just a shelter. William found himself looking forward to meals with an intensity that had nothing to do with food. Catherine was an excellent cook, certainly, but more than that, he enjoyed their conversations. She asked about his work and listened with genuine interest as he explained the challenges of managing cattle and maintaining the land. In turn, she told him more about her life back east, and William found himself fascinated by her descriptions of a world so different from his own. One evening, about a week after their arrival, William came in from a long day of mending fences to find Catherine on the porch, watching the sunset. He hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but she turned and smiled at him in a way that made his heart skip. "Come sit," she said, gesturing to the space beside her on the steps. "You work too hard to not enjoy moments like this." William sat, acutely aware of the few inches that separated them. The sky was ablaze with color, orange and pink and purple bleeding together in a display that never failed to move him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Catherine spoke quietly. "I have been thinking about what I should do," she said. "About my future." William's chest tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Have you reached any conclusions?" "I would like to stay," Catherine said, not looking at him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "If the offer is still open. I like it here, William. I like the space and the quiet and the sense that one can build something real. I like the work of keeping the house and tending the garden. And I like you." The last words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that William was afraid to fully acknowledge. "I like you too," he said carefully. "You have brought something to this place that was missing. But Catherine, I need you to understand my position. You came here to marry my brother. It does not feel right for me to have feelings for you, not so soon after his death, not when you were meant to be his." "I never met Thomas," Catherine said quietly. "I fell in love with words on a page, with ideas and dreams that may not have had any basis in reality. You, William Warren, are real. You rode 3 days to meet me when you could have simply sent a telegram. You offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to turn. You have treated me with respect and kindness every single day since we met. How can you think it is wrong for me to develop feelings for you?" William turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in her expression undid something in his chest. "I do not want you to feel obligated," he said roughly. "I do not want you to think that staying here means you owe me anything." "I do not feel obligated," Catherine said firmly. "I feel grateful, yes, but also genuinely happy. I feel more at home here in this place I have known for barely a week than I ever felt in Philadelphia. Is that so hard to believe?" "No," William admitted. "Because I feel the same way about having you here. It terrifies me, how much I have come to look forward to seeing you each day, how empty the house feels when you are not in it." They looked at each other as the sun sank below the horizon, and William saw his own conflicted feelings reflected in Catherine's eyes. The attraction between them was undeniable, but so was the complicated situation that had brought them together. "What do we do?" Catherine asked softly. "We take our time," William said, making the decision as he spoke. "We do not rush into anything. We let things develop naturally if they are meant to develop at all. You have been through tremendous upheaval, and I do not want you making decisions you might regret." "That is very sensible and mature of you," Catherine said, and there was a hint of amusement in her voice. Also slightly frustrating. William laughed despite himself, surprised by her directness. "I am trying to be honorable here." "I know," Catherine said, and she reached over to briefly touch his hand, a gesture so simple and yet so charged that William felt it like electricity. "And I respect that about you. Very well, William Warren. We will take our time and see what happens." The summer days passed into weeks, and William found himself navigating territory more dangerous than any he had ever crossed on horseback. Living in close quarters with Catherine was both a joy and a torment. He was constantly aware of her presence, of the small intimacies of shared domestic space. The sound of her humming as she worked in the kitchen, the sight of her tending her growing garden in the early morning light, the conversations they shared in the evening after the day's work was done, all of it wound itself around his heart, until he could not imagine his life without her in it. Catherine seemed to feel the same way, though they were both careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. She touched his hand sometimes when passing him his coffee, let their shoulders brush when they sat on the porch together, looked at him with eyes that held more than simple friendship. But they did not speak of it directly, both honoring William's decision to let things progress slowly. Henderson visited regularly, his sharp eyes tracking the development of their relationship with something that looked like amused resignation. "You are both being idiots," he announced one afternoon when he stopped by and found William alone, repairing a saddle in the barn. "I have no idea what you are talking about," William said, though he absolutely did. "That woman is in love with you and you are in love with her," Henderson said bluntly. "Everyone within 10 miles can see it. What exactly are you waiting for?" "It has only been a few months since Thomas died," William said, "and she came here to marry him. It feels disrespectful to rush into something." "Thomas is dead," Henderson said with the brutal honesty of someone who had seen too much death to romanticize it. "You are alive, and so is she. You think your brother would want you both to be miserable out of some misplaced sense of obligation to his memory." "I do not know what Thomas would have wanted," William admitted. "I am still angry at him, if I am being honest. Angry that he kept Catherine a secret, angry that he died before I could meet her as his fiancé, angry that he left me to deal with this impossible situation." "Then stop letting a dead man control your life," Henderson said firmly. "You have been given a second chance at happiness, William. Most people do not get that. Do not throw it away because you think you are supposed to mourn forever." Henderson's words stayed with William as August turned to September and the heat began to break. The ranch kept him busy with the constant demands of cattle and land, but his thoughts were never far from Catherine. He noticed everything about her now. The way she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the soft sound of her laughter when something amused her, the competence with which she had taken over the household accounts and somehow managed to find savings in their modest budget. One evening in late September, a storm rolled in from the coast, bringing with it the kind of wind and rain that rattled the windows and turned the world outside into a blur of water. William and Catherine retreated to the house early, and after supper, they sat in the main room with oil lamps casting warm light against the darkness beyond. "Tell me about Thomas," Catherine said suddenly, setting down the sewing she had been working on. "Not about how he died, but about who he was. You never really speak of him." William was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer. "He was complicated," he said finally. "Older than me by 4 years, and he always felt the weight of being the responsible one after our parents died. He could be serious and focused, but also capable of great kindness. He taught me to ride, to rope cattle, to survive in this country. I owed him everything." "But," Catherine prompted gently, "but he also kept secrets," William said. "He never told me about you, about the letters, about his plans to marry. That hurts even now. It makes me wonder what else I did not know about him." "I think perhaps he was afraid," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Afraid to tell you about me in case I changed my mind, or in case something went wrong. He wrote very little about his personal feelings in his letters to me. Everything was about the ranch, about California, about the future we might build. But of himself, of his hopes and fears and dreams, almost nothing." "That sounds like Thomas," William admitted. "He always found it hard to be vulnerable, to admit weakness or uncertainty. Our father was like that too, keeping everything locked inside until it festered." "You are not like that," Catherine observed. "You speak about what you feel, even when it is difficult." "I learned the hard way that keeping things inside only makes them worse," William said. "After our parents died, I was angry and sad and scared, and I tried to hide it all. Thomas told me once that strength was not about hiding your feelings, but about having the courage to face them. It is one of the best lessons he ever taught me." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Then Catherine spoke again, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I need to tell you something, William, something I have been thinking about for weeks now." William's heart began to beat faster. "All right." "When I agreed to marry Thomas, I did so with practical expectations," Catherine said carefully. "I hoped we might build affection over time, but I had no illusions about passionate love or romance. That was not what I was looking for. I wanted safety, partnership, a chance to build a new life." "I understand that," William said. "But what I have found here with you is something I did not even know I wanted," Catherine continued, and now she turned to look at him directly, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I find myself thinking about you constantly, William. Wondering what you are doing when you are out working, looking forward to the moment you will come back to the house. I wake up each morning excited about the day ahead because I know I will spend it in your presence. That was never part of my plan, never something I imagined feeling. And I need to know if you feel any of the same." William stood abruptly, unable to remain still in the face of her confession. He paced to the window, staring out at the storm-darkened landscape, trying to find the right words. "I rode 3 days to meet you, because I told myself it was the honorable thing to do," he said finally. "But the truth is that I looked at your photograph and felt something I could not name. And when I met you in person, when I saw your strength and grace in the face of terrible news, I knew I was lost. Every day you have been here has been both wonderful and torture, because I want so badly to tell you how I feel, but I am terrified of taking advantage of your situation." "You are not taking advantage of me," Catherine said firmly, and William heard her footsteps as she crossed the room to stand behind him. "I am not some helpless damsel, William. I know my own mind, and I know what I want. I want to stay here, not just as your guest or your housekeeper, but as your partner. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." William turned to face her, and the careful control he had been maintaining for months finally shattered. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been in love with you since the moment you stepped off that train. I have been fighting it, thinking it was wrong, but Henderson was right. I have been given a second chance, and I am done being too afraid to take it." The space between them disappeared as William reached for Catherine, and she came willingly into his arms. Their first kiss was tentative, questioning, but it quickly deepened into something profound and true. William felt years of loneliness and isolation melt away in the warmth of her embrace, replaced by a sense of homecoming more powerful than anything he had ever experienced. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Catherine was smiling with a radiance that took his breath away. "I believe we have wasted quite enough time on propriety," she said. "What do you say we stop pretending this is temporary?" "I say yes," William replied. "To everything. To you staying permanently, to building a life together, to whatever comes next. But Catherine, I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, and then I want to marry you with everyone we know as witnesses. I do not want there to be any question about what you mean to me." "That sounds perfect," Catherine said, and she kissed him again, softer this time but no less meaningful. They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, making plans that ranged from practical to fantastical. William found himself describing dreams he had never shared with anyone, ideas for expanding the ranch, for building a better house, for creating something that would last beyond their lifetimes. Catherine listened and contributed her own ideas, her perspective shaped by a different experience but no less valuable. When the storm finally passed and they reluctantly separated to go to their respective bedrooms, William lay awake with a smile on his face, unable to believe how dramatically his life had changed in just a few short months. He had ridden north to deliver bad news to a stranger, and had returned with the woman who would become his future. The next few weeks were a blur of happiness as William and Catherine navigated their new relationship openly. Henderson approved with gruff satisfaction, and word spread through their small community that William Warren was courting the Eastern woman who had come west to marry his brother. There was some gossip, inevitable in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but most of it was kind. William took Catherine to meet the neighbors, introducing her properly to the handful of ranching families who made up their social circle. She charmed them all with her genuine interest and quick intelligence, and William watched with pride as she began to establish her own place in the community. In early November, William rode into San Diego and returned with a ring, a simple gold band with a small emerald that reminded him of Catherine's eyes. He proposed to her at sunset on the porch where they had shared so many conversations, and she said yes before he had even finished asking the question. They were married in late November in a simple ceremony at the small church in San Diego, with Henderson standing as William's witness and a rancher's wife named Mary standing for Catherine. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding Catherine might have had if she had married Thomas as planned, but it was perfect in its simplicity and honesty. Their wedding night was spent in a hotel in San Diego before returning home the next day, And William discovered that the passionate connection they had found emotionally extended to the physical as well. Catherine came to him with a mixture of nervousness and eagerness, and they explored this new dimension of their relationship with care and growing confidence. Life settled into a new rhythm after their marriage, one that felt right in a way nothing else in William's life ever had. Catherine was his true partner in every sense, working beside him on the ranch decisions, managing the household with skill, and filling his evenings with conversation and companionship that never grew stale. Winter passed into spring, and with the new season came news that Catherine was pregnant. William received the announcement with a mixture of joy and terror, acutely aware of all the things that could go wrong. But Catherine faced the prospect with her usual practical courage, reading every book on childbirth she could find and preparing with the same competence she brought to everything else. Their son was born in late autumn of the following year, a healthy boy with William's dark hair and Catherine's intelligent eyes. They named him Daniel Warren, and William held his son with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the reality of this small life they had created together. "He is perfect," Catherine said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "We made something perfect, William." "We did," William agreed, and he bent to kiss his wife, this woman who had come into his life so unexpectedly and changed everything for the better. As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered in ways it never had before. Catherine's careful management of their resources allowed them to invest in better breeding stock, and William's hard work combined with good weather resulted in several profitable years. They were able to add on to the house, creating more space for their growing family and making the place more comfortable. When Daniel was 3, Catherine gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, and the house rang with the sounds of children's laughter. William sometimes had to stop and marvel at how full his life had become, how the lonely rancher who had existed just a few years before seemed like a completely different person. Henderson remained a constant presence, an honorary grandfather to the children and a trusted friend to both William and Catherine. One evening, when the twins were about a year old, he sat on the porch with William while Catherine put the children to bed. "You ever think about how things might have gone differently?" Henderson asked, puffing on his pipe. "Sometimes," William admitted. "If Thomas had not died, Catherine would have married him, and I never would have known her. It feels wrong to be grateful for my brother's death, but I cannot imagine my life without her." "Life is like that sometimes," Henderson said philosophically. "Terrible things happen, and somehow good comes from them anyway. The trick is to recognize the good when it shows up and not let it slip away." "I nearly did let it slip away," William said. "I was so worried about doing the right thing, about being respectful to Thomas's memory, that I almost lost my chance at happiness." "But you did not," Henderson pointed out. "You took the risk, and look what you have now. A wife who loves you, 3 healthy children, a ranch that is thriving. You built this, William. You and Catherine together." William nodded, watching the sun set over the land he had worked all his life. Henderson was right. Whatever complicated circumstances had brought them together, he and Catherine had chosen to build something real and lasting. They had taken a situation born of loss and confusion and transformed it into love and family. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. There were droughts that tested their resources, cattle diseases that required careful management, and the endless physical demands of ranching life. But through it all, William and Catherine faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who showed every sign of becoming a skilled rancher like his father. The twins were inseparable and endlessly energetic, keeping both parents on their toes. When Daniel was 10, Catherine gave birth to another son, James, and the family felt complete. One evening, when the children were all in bed and William and Catherine had a rare moment of peace, they sat together on the porch that had been witness to so many important moments in their relationship. Catherine leaned against William's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling content in a way that still sometimes surprised him. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" William asked, curious about the life she had left behind. "No," Catherine said without hesitation. "Sometimes I miss my father, wish he could have met you and seen the life I have built here. But the city itself, not for a moment. This is my home, William. This land, this house, you and our children. Everything I need is right here." "I used to think I was content with solitude," William said. "Just me and the ranch and the work. But you showed me what I was missing, showed me that life could be so much richer when shared with someone you love." "We showed each other," Catherine corrected gently. "I came west looking for security and found love instead. You gave me that, William. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. William thought about the letter that had arrived nearly a decade ago, addressed to a man who was already dead. That single piece of paper had set in motion a chain of events that had transformed both their lives completely. If Thomas had lived, Catherine would have become William's sister-in-law, and they likely would have maintained a cordial but distant relationship. William probably would have remained a bachelor, focused on his work and never knowing what he was missing. Catherine would have married a man she had never met and spent her life wondering if there was something more. Instead, fate and a misdirected letter had brought them together, and they had been brave enough to seize the unexpected opportunity. It had not been easy, navigating the complicated emotions and social expectations, but it had been worth every moment of uncertainty. As the children grew older, William and Catherine made sure they knew the story of how their parents had met, presenting it honestly as the unusual and complicated situation it had been. Daniel, with his serious nature, asked questions about his Uncle Thomas, wanting to understand the man he had never met. William did his best to be fair in his descriptions, acknowledging both Thomas's good qualities and his flaws. "Do you think Uncle Thomas would have been happy that you married Mama?" Daniel asked one day when he was about 15, helping William mend a fence. William considered the question carefully. "I think Thomas would have wanted both of us to be happy," he said finally. He was not always good at expressing his feelings, but he was not a cruel or selfish man. "I believe that if he could see us now, see the family we have built, he would approve." "Good," Daniel said with a satisfied nod. "Because I cannot imagine having any other mother or our family being any different." "Neither can I," William agreed, and he meant it with his whole heart. The ranch continued to prosper as Daniel grew old enough to take on more responsibility. The twins, Emma and Sarah, both showed interest in horses and developed into excellent riders. James, the youngest, was still finding his place but showed signs of his mother's quick intelligence and his father's steady determination. When William turned 45, he and Catherine celebrated their anniversary by taking a rare trip back to San Diego, leaving the children in Henderson's capable care. It was strange to walk the streets where they had first met, to see how much the city had grown in the intervening years. They visited the train station, standing on the platform where Catherine had disembarked all those years ago, full of hope and fear about meeting a man she had never seen. "I was so nervous," Catherine remembered, smiling at the memory. "I kept rehearsing what I would say, how I would greet him. And then you appeared instead, and nothing went according to plan." "The best things in life rarely do," William said, taking her hand. I came here thinking I was doing the right thing by delivering bad news in person. I had no idea I was about to meet the woman who would change my entire life." "We were both so careful at first," Catherine said. "So worried about propriety and what people would think. I am glad we eventually stopped caring about all that and focused on what we wanted." "Me too," William said, and he kissed her right there on the platform, not caring who saw. They returned home to find the ranch running smoothly and the children thriving. Henderson had regaled them with stories of their parents' younger days, and Daniel in particular seemed fascinated by the tale of how William had ridden 3 days to meet Catherine, not knowing that decision would lead to everything that came after. As the years passed, William and Catherine began to step back slightly from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Daniel to take on more leadership. It was time, William recognized, to start thinking about succession and the future beyond his own lifetime. He and Catherine had built something worth preserving, and he wanted to make sure it continued to thrive for generations to come. The twins married in their early 20s, Emma to a neighboring rancher's son and Sarah to a businessman from San Diego who had come out to California seeking opportunities. James, following in his mother's intellectual footsteps, talked about becoming a teacher, and Catherine supported his ambitions completely. On their 25th wedding anniversary, William and Catherine renewed their vows in the same little church where they had first married, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Henderson, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, stood as witness once again, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Never thought I would see the day," Henderson said gruffly afterward, embracing them both. "You two were such idiots at the start, dancing around each other and pretending you were not in love. But you figured it out eventually, and look what you have built." "We could not have done it without you," William said honestly. "You were the one who told me to stop being an idiot and admit how I felt." "Someone had to," Henderson said with a chuckle. "You Warren boys always were too stubborn for your own good." That evening, alone in their bedroom, William and Catherine reflected on a quarter-century of marriage. 25 years, Catherine marveled. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," William said. "Sometimes I still see you as you were that day at the train station, all hope and heartbreak and strength. Other times, I look at you and see every moment we have shared since then written on your face." "We have lived a good life together," Catherine said softly. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I was that frightened young woman stepping off the train into an uncertain future." "The best life," William agreed. "And we are not done yet. I plan to grow old and stubborn with you, watching our grandchildren grow up and maybe even meeting great-grandchildren if we are lucky." "That sounds perfect," Catherine said, and she kissed him with the same passion they had shared as newlyweds, proof that their love had not diminished with time but had only grown deeper and more profound. Henderson passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, and William and Catherine mourned the loss of their dear friend. At his funeral, William spoke about Henderson's kindness and wisdom, about how he had been there at every important moment of their life together. "He was the first person besides us who believed in what we could build together," William said. "And he was right to believe. Everything good in my life exists because I was brave enough to take the chance he encouraged me to take." As William and Catherine entered their 60s, they settled into a comfortable routine that revolved around family and the land they had spent decades caring for. Daniel and his wife had taken over most of the ranch operations, but William still went out every day to check on things, unable to fully relinquish the work that had defined so much of his life. One autumn afternoon, William and Catherine sat on their familiar porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Catherine's hair was mostly gray now, and William's face was lined with years of sun and wind. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been when they first met. "You remember that first sunset we watched together?" Catherine asked, her hand in William's. "When I told you I wanted to stay." "I remember every moment of that evening," William said. "I was terrified and hopeful in equal measure. I wanted so badly for you to stay, but I was afraid to trust that you might feel the same way." "I knew that night that I was falling in love with you," Catherine admitted. "I tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I should be more practical, but my heart would not listen to reason." "Thank God for that," William said fervently. "If we had both listened to reason, we would have missed out on all of this." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, wrapped in the comfort of decades of shared life. Behind them, in the house they had built together, their family gathered for supper. The sound of children's laughter and adult conversation drifted out through the open windows, a symphony of the life they had created. "I have no regrets," Catherine said softly. "Not a single one. Everything I went through, everything that brought me here was worth it to have this life with you." "Same for me," William said. "I would not change a single thing, not even the pain and confusion at the start. It was all part of the journey that brought us here." As they stood to go inside and join their family, William paused to look back at the land spreading out before them, dark now in the gathering night. This ranch, this life, this family, it had all started with a letter meant for someone else, and a 3-day ride to meet a stranger who became everything. He thought about Thomas sometimes, wondered what his brother would think of how things had turned out. He liked to imagine that Thomas would be happy, that he would approve of the way William had cared for the woman who was meant to be Thomas's bride. Perhaps, in some way, this was exactly how things were supposed to happen. Perhaps Thomas had served as the bridge that brought William and Catherine together, his brief presence in both their lives the catalyst that made everything else possible. William would never know for sure, and he had made his peace with that uncertainty. What he did know, with absolute certainty, was that he had been given an extraordinary gift that day when he decided to ride north to San Diego instead of sending a telegram. That decision had led to everything good in his life, and he would be grateful for it until his last breath. Inside the house, Catherine waited for him, her smile as warm and welcoming as it had been on their wedding day. William took her hand and allowed himself to be pulled into the warmth and noise of family, into the life they had built from unexpected beginnings. The letter had been meant for his brother, but the love had been meant for him. It had just taken a 3-day ride and a leap of faith to discover that truth. Their grandchildren, 5 in total by now, clamored for attention, and William settled into his chair with the youngest on his knee. The child looked up at him with curious eyes and asked, "Grandpa, tell us the story again about how you met Grandma." William looked across the room at Catherine, who was helping to set the table, and she caught his eye and smiled, that particular smile that was just for him. "Well," he began, launching into the tale that had become family legend. "It all started with a letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning, addressed to a man who had already died. I could have sent a telegram explaining everything, but instead, I saddled up my horse and rode for 3 days to meet a woman I had never seen." The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard the story dozens of times before. Each time William told it, he tried to capture the mixture of fear and hope that had characterized those early days, the sense that he was balanced on a knife's edge between disaster and joy. "And when you saw Grandma, what did you think?" Emma's oldest daughter asked, her eyes wide. "I thought she was the most beautiful, brave woman I had ever seen," William said honestly. "And I knew, deep in my heart, that I could not let her walk out of my life. So I asked her to come home with me, and thank goodness she said yes." "Best decision I ever made," Catherine called from across the room, and the warmth in her voice made William's heart swell with love that had not diminished one bit in all their years together. They shared supper as a family, the table crowded and loud with conversation and laughter. This was what William had built, what he and Catherine had created together from the ashes of loss and confusion. Every person at this table existed because he had been brave enough to ride 3 days to meet a woman he did not know, because Catherine had been brave enough to trust him and stay. As the evening drew to a close, and their children and grandchildren began to depart for their own homes, William and Catherine stood on the porch once more, waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, they stood together in the darkness, arms around each other. "Another good day," Catherine said contentedly. "The best kind," William agreed, "filled with family and love and all the things that matter." They stood there a while longer, neither wanting to go inside just yet. The night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. William thought about all the nights they had stood in this exact spot, watching the sky and talking about their lives. He thought about the letter that had started everything, about the woman who had written it full of hope for a future that had turned out completely different than she had imagined. Better though, so much better than either of them could have dreamed. "I love you," William said, the words as sincere and meaningful as the first time he had spoken them decades ago. "I love you too," Catherine replied, and she turned in his arms to kiss him, soft and sweet and perfect. They went inside together, closing the door on another day, another chapter in a life that had been full of unexpected turns and extraordinary blessings. William helped Catherine prepare for bed, the familiar routine one they had performed thousands of times, but which still felt special somehow. As they lay together in the darkness, Catherine's head on William's shoulder, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He had been given so much more than he deserved, more than he had ever dared to hope for. A love that had sustained him through decades, children who were growing into good people, a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. "William," Catherine's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes, my love. Thank you for riding 3 days to meet me. Thank you for offering me a place to stay. Thank you for being patient when I was confused and scared. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for staying," William replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough rancher who did not know the first thing about courting a proper lady. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They drifted off to sleep holding hands, the way they had done for more than 30 years, their hearts as intertwined now as their fingers. Outside, the land stretched away into darkness, the ranch they had built together with hard work and determination and love. It would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and for generations to come, a testament to what two people could create when they were brave enough to seize an unexpected chance at happiness. The letter had been meant for Thomas Warren, but the life it had created belonged entirely to William and Catherine. They had taken the broken pieces of loss and disappointment and forged them into something beautiful and lasting. And every sunset they watched together, every meal they shared, every moment of laughter and struggle and triumph, was a gift that had started with a 3-day ride to meet a stranger who became his everything. In the morning, William woke to find Catherine already up, humming in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of his wife moving through their home, and felt his heart swell with love and contentment. This was his life, the one he had built with courage and hope and faith in the future. It was a good life, a blessed life, and he would be grateful for every remaining day of it. He rose and dressed, heading out to the kitchen where Catherine greeted him with a smile and a cup of coffee, just the way he liked it. They ate breakfast together as they had done for more than 3 decades, talking about their plans for the day and the week ahead. Daniel would be stopping by later to discuss some decisions about the cattle, and the twins had promised to bring the grandchildren for a visit on Sunday. Life continued, as it always did, full of work and family and the small joys that made each day worthwhile. And through it all, William and Catherine faced everything together, partners in the truest sense of the word, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. Years later, when William was in his 80s and knew his time was growing short, he sat on the porch one last time with Catherine, her hand in his. "I want you to know," he said, his voice weaker than it had once been but still steady, "that loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. You made everything better, everything richer, everything more meaningful. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me love when I had given up hoping for it. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every single day. You were my unexpected blessing, William Warren." "And you were mine," William said, "my unexpected, perfect blessing." He passed away peacefully, a few days later, surrounded by his family, with Catherine holding his hand just as she had held it through all the important moments of their shared life. She grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing a partner of more than 40 years, but she also knew that they had been given something rare and precious. Their love story had started with a letter meant for someone else, and a 3-day ride into the unknown, and it had ended with a lifetime of memories and a family that would carry their legacy forward. Catherine lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had all benefited from the love story that had created their family. She spent her remaining time recording stories of her life with William, wanting future generations to know about the man who had been brave enough to ride 3 days to meet a stranger and wise enough to recognize love when it found him. When Catherine finally joined William, she was buried beside him on the ranch they had built together, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the years of their lives. But their real monument was all around in the land that still thrived under Daniel's care, in the children and grandchildren who carried their blood and their values, in the love story that had become family legend. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the family gathered on the porch of the house that William and Catherine had built, someone would tell the story again. The story of a letter meant for one brother that found its way to another, of a 3-day ride that changed 2 lives forever, of love that grew from the most unlikely circumstances into something that transcended time and death. It was a good story, a true story, and a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. All it takes is courage to recognize opportunity when it appears, faith to take a chance on something uncertain, and love to transform possibility into reality. William and Catherine had possessed all 3 qualities in abundance, and they had used them to create a life that was rich beyond measure. Their story lived on, passed down through generations, inspiring others to be brave in the face of uncertainty and open to love even when it arrived in unexpected packaging. And the ranch continued to thrive, a living testament to what 2 people could build when they chose partnership over loneliness, courage over caution, and love over fear. The letter had been meant for his brother, but the love, the life, the legacy, all of that belonged to William and Catherine Warren, 2 souls who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last forever.